"You don't deserve to be here," Dad shouted, loud enough for everyone outside the lawyer's office to hear. Then he pointed toward the elevator like I was hired help. I didn't argue. I closed my fingers around Grandma Eleanor's brass key and watched them shut the conference room door in my face. 8 minutes later, the lawyer called me inside. Dad was smirking when the first document hit the table. Then the lawyer looked at him and said, I owned every house they were living in. His smile disappeared. But Grandma hadn't only taken away their homes. She had left me proof of something far worse. 3 years earlier, Grandma Eleanor's house still smelled like cinnamon coffee every morning. The place sat in a quiet suburb outside Boston, with faded blue shutters, warm hardwood floors, and a heating vent that hummed louder than the television on the kitchen shelf. Beside a chipped sugar bowl rested a small brass key that no longer opened anything. I was 38 then, working as a property investment specialist. I had spent years building a solid career, but when Grandma's health began to fail, I cut back my hours and started visiting 4 days a week. My family called it a mistake. Dad called it wasted potential. My older brother Daniel called it proof that I had never been serious about success. But they never saw what those afternoons looked like. I checked Grandma's bills while she made tea. I scheduled repairs, reviewed payments, and drove her to appointments. Sometimes we talked about real estate. Other times we sat in silence while rain tapped against the sunroom windows. That silence never felt empty. At Thanksgiving, our family filled her dining room with expensive perfume, polished shoes, and loud stories about promotions and vacations. Dad sat at the head of the table, praising Daniel for becoming the future of the family. Then he looked at me. So, Vivian, when are you going back to a real job? A few people laughed. I glanced at Grandma. Her hand shook as she cut a thin slice of pumpkin pie. Nobody noticed she had barely eaten. Nobody asked whether she had slept well or why her sweater hung more loosely than it had the year before. They noticed the house. They always noticed the house. Grandma had begun counting every absence, every broken promise, and every request that arrived with a price. Grandma owned 6 homes used by relatives. Along with apartment buildings and several commercial properties, Dad lived in the largest one. Daniel called another his place. Aunt Linda had stayed in hers for nearly 20 years. None of them held the deeds. Most paid little more than basic expenses. Some paid nothing. Still, they spoke about renovations, resale value, and inheritance as if Grandma had already handed them the keys. One cold morning, she asked me to drive her to an old diner downtown. We sat in a cracked vinyl booth while coffee steamed between us. She placed the brass key in my palm. "It does not open a door anymore," she said, "but it reminds me that a house only matters when the people inside remember who kept it standing." Then she studied my face. "If kindness becomes something people believe they are owed, what would you do?" I thought she was asking about business. I did not know she was asking me to choose what would happen to our family over the next 3 years. Grandma's question followed me everywhere. So did the pattern. Dad canceled Sunday visits because of club dinners. Daniel missed her birthday twice, then sent flowers ordered by his assistant. Aunt Linda called whenever the roof leaked, the furnace groaned, or the property taxes came due. Ashley asked Grandma for help covering what she called a temporary expense. 4 days later, she posted photos from a resort in Arizona. Ryan only appeared when he wanted the lake house for a weekend. Grandma never complained. She simply wrote things down. One afternoon, while reviewing her payments and bills, I found years of support hidden behind ordinary family habits: repairs, utilities, insurance, taxes, emergency loans that were never repaid. Altogether, she had spent more than $400,000 keeping everyone comfortable. I stared at the total. Do they know I asked? Grandma folded her hands over her cardigan. They know enough not to ask. That was when Daniel began watching me. He arrived unannounced one evening and found financial statements spread across the sunroom table. "What exactly are you doing with her money?" he asked, helping her understand where it goes. He laughed without humor. "You mean helping yourself?" Dad called the next morning. He said the family was considering hiring a professional caregiver so I could step back. What he meant was step away. Grandma asked everyone to come over that Saturday. Her voice was weak, but when Dad repeated his concerns, she looked directly at him. "Vivian does not control me," she said. "She is the only person here who listens when I speak." The room went still. Daniel looked embarrassed. Dad looked insulted, and from that day forward, they stopped pretending their suspicion was concern. When Grandma died, they returned wearing black coats and solemn faces. At the funeral, Dad delivered a polished speech about devotion. Then he referred to Grandma's favorite flowers as roses. They were peonies. 2 weeks later, we gathered at a law office in Boston. I wore a navy dress and kept the brass key in my coat pocket. Dad saw me near the conference room and frowned. "Why are you here?" The lawyer asked me to come. Daniel adjusted his cuff and smiled. "Maybe Grandma left you a little caregiver bonus." Then Dad stepped in front of the door. "You don't deserve to be here." His voice carried through the hallway. He accused me of isolating Grandma. Aunt Linda said Eleanor had not been herself near the end. Ashley would not meet my eyes. But she walked past me anyway, the door closed, through the glass. I watched Daniel point at a photo of his house and talk about expanding the garage. My phone vibrated. The final transfer had been confirmed. In that moment, I understood Grandma had not invited them to divide her legacy. She had invited them to answer for it. Then the lawyer's assistant opened the door and said, "Ms. Hayes, they're ready for you now." I stayed in the hallway for a minute after the assistant spoke. The brass key had left a crescent mark in my palm. For the first time since Grandma died, I wanted to cry, not because Dad had humiliated me. I had survived that before. What broke something inside me was knowing they had spent the last 2 weeks grieving an inheritance. Not a woman. Then I remembered the last winter we shared, 6 months before her death. Grandma sat in the sunroom beneath a wool blanket, watching snow gather along the windows. "I don't trust Robert to handle this fairly," she said. I told her we could delay the conversation. She shook her head. "Delay is how people like your father turn kindness into ownership." She explained that she did not want to punish anyone. She wanted the family protected from its worst habits, including mine. When she said she wanted me to take control of the properties, I stood so quickly my chair scraped the floor. "No, they'll say I stayed for the money." "They already say that," she replied. "They would say it if I left you $1 or 100 million. Her words hurt because they were true. Still, Grandma refused to build her plan on trust alone. She hired Thomas Reed as her independent lawyer. He met with her privately, without me in the room. Separate advisors reviewed every property, every transfer, and every consequence. Doctors evaluated her more than once and confirmed that she understood exactly what she was doing. The 6 family homes, the apartment buildings, and the commercial properties were placed into a legal asset structure months before she died. I would take ownership and manage it afterward, but Grandma placed limits on me too. I could not sell property to myself below market value. I could not raise rent out of anger. I could not remove anyone without proper notice. Every rate had to be supported by an independent appraisal, and anyone facing real hardship could request a temporary payment plan. She had protected them from my anger before I ever had the chance to feel it. "That is not revenge," I told her. Grandma looked toward the snow. "No," she said. "It is a boundary they cannot talk their way around." Back in the hallway, I wiped beneath my eyes and straightened my sleeves. Then I walked into the conference room. No one moved to make space for me. Thomas pulled out the chair beside him. "Ms. Hayes's presence is required," he said. Dad rolled his eyes. "Can we skip the performance and get to the distribution?" Thomas opened the folder in front of him. Mrs. Hayes was fully competent when she made these decisions. Daniel leaned back, already smiling. Thomas turned to the first page. "We will begin with the homes each of you occupies." Dad's smile widened. He still believed he was about to inherit a house. He had no idea he was about to meet his landlord. Thomas folded his hands. Mrs. Hayes owned 6 residential properties occupied by this family. Dad leaned back. That makes things simple, he said. Each house goes to the person living in it. I have plans for the garage. Aunt Linda touched her envelope. When do we sign the deeds? Thomas let the silence stretch. You will not be signing deeds. Dad's smile vanished. 6 months before her death. Mrs. Hayes transferred those properties into a legal asset structure. Thomas continued. Who controls it? Dad asked. Thomas looked at me. Vivian Hayes is the sole owner and managing authority. Daniel's pen struck the table. Linda crushed her envelope. Ashley stared at me, then at her leather bag. Ryan stopped smiling. Dad looked between Thomas and me as if we had spoken another language. In plain English, I owned every house they called theirs. Thomas pressed a button. The wall screen displayed homes, apartment buildings, and commercial properties worth over $100 million. Dad stood. This is fraud. No, Thomas said. It is documented estate planning. She manipulated my mother. Mrs. Hayes met with me privately. She had separate advisors and completed multiple competency evaluations. Vivian was excluded from key meetings to prevent that accusation. Dad turned toward me. You poisoned her against us. I felt the old reflex to defend myself. Then Thomas touched the remote. Grandma appeared on the screen in her cream cardigan, the brass key resting before her. Her eyes were steady. If you are watching this, she said, then I am gone. And some of you are angry. Linda covered her mouth. I did not choose Vivian because she was my favorite. I chose her because she understood that property is not a prize. It is a responsibility. Daniel shook his head. This was staged. Thomas paused the video. There were 2 independent witnesses. He resumed it. Grandma described canceled visits, unanswered calls, and requests that always arrived with a cost. Repairs, taxes, utilities, emergency payments. She simply told the truth. Then she mentioned when her furnace failed. Vivian came with soup, blankets, and a repairman. She said, Robert messaged me that evening asking me to cover work on his pool. Dad's face tightened. Turn it off. I looked at him. No. 1 word. It was the first time he could not make me smaller by raising his voice. These homes are not weapons, Grandma continued. They are lessons. I helped my family because I loved them, somewhere along the way. Help became expectation, and expectation became entitlement. When the screen went dark, nobody moved. Thomas placed a packet before each person. You may remain during the legal transition period. Independent appraisals will determine rent. Initial rates will be slightly below market. Anyone facing genuine hardship may request a payment plan. Ryan stared at the papers. So she is not throwing us out. No, no one is being put on the street. Dad grabbed his packet. That house is mine in every way that matters. Whose name is on the deed I asked? He did not answer. Daniel leaned forward. We will sue. You may seek separate counsel, Thomas said. The structure anticipated that possibility. Linda's eyes filled. Did she really want us paying rent? She wanted you to stop calling her sacrifice your property. Dad's voice softened. We are family. I held his gaze. You decided I wasn't family 5 minutes ago. No one looked at him. Thomas opened another summary. Grandma had spent more than $400,000 on repairs, taxes, utilities, and family support, Ashley whispered. I didn't know. That was the problem. None of you asked. Daniel glared at me. Are you enjoying this? Part of me wanted you to feel what I felt outside that door, I admitted. But Grandma planned this so I could not punish you in anger. I placed the brass key on the table. This was Grandma's final revenge. Not homelessness, responsibility. Linda wiped her face. Did she forgive us? She never stopped loving you. But love does not require someone to keep paying your bills while you ignore them. Thomas explained the final condition. I could not raise rent to retaliate or sell their homes for personal gain. Every decision required records and outside review. Grandma had protected them from my anger. She had also protected me from becoming like them. Dad stared at the key for the first time. He looked afraid. Not because he would lose his home that day, because his mother had seen exactly who he was. You have time to choose, Thomas said. sign a transition agreement, submit a reasonable proposal, or prepare to move through the proper process. Dad looked at me. Will you make an exception for me? I stood. I will give you what you gave Grandma, a chance to show who you really are. No one stopped me as I walked toward the door. No one asked me to fetch coffee. No one said I did not belong. I stepped into the hallway first, while they remained behind, staring at homes they had mistaken for love. 2 months later, the new agreements took effect. No one was forced out. That mattered to me. Grandma had made sure justice would not become cruelty. But for the first time, everyone had to live within the truth. Ashley moved into a smaller apartment in one of the buildings I managed. At first, she treated it like a public humiliation. She stopped posting photos for a while. Then one afternoon, she admitted she had been spending money to look successful instead of building a stable life. Aunt Linda went back to work part-time. She complained for weeks, then surprised me by submitting her first maintenance request through the proper system instead of calling me at night and saying, "We're family." Daniel refused to sign anything until 3 lawyers told him the same thing. Grandma's plan was legal, documented, and stronger than his anger. His marriage began to crack, but not because of the rent. His wife told him she was tired of watching him blame me, Grandma, and everyone else for choices he had made himself. Dad stayed in the largest house to afford it. He left the country club, sold a second car, and began reading the bills Grandma had quietly covered for years. I worked from her old sunroom. I kept her chair near the window. The brass key rested beside my laptop, catching the morning light. Some days, power felt clean. Other days, it felt dangerous. Whenever I denied a family request, I asked myself one question. Was I protecting Grandma's legacy, or was I enjoying the chance to say no? That question saved me. When Ryan faced a real medical setback, I approved a temporary payment plan. He had followed the process, provided honest numbers, and asked without demanding. I was not punishing weakness. I was refusing to reward entitlement. 6 months after the reading, Dad arrived at my office without an appointment. His suit was still pressed, but it hung loosely around his shoulders. He looked older than he had in the conference room. "We need a reasonable family arrangement," he said. I opened the file from the day he had shut me out. "Do you want something fair?" I asked. "Or do you want the old privilege back?" His jaw tightened. "Your grandmother would not want this family destroyed. Grandma spent years trying to hold this family together. Most of you only showed up when you needed something." He looked toward her empty chair. "For what it is worth." "I was wrong about you. It was not an apology. Not yet. So I told him the rent would remain tied to the independent appraisal. I would not raise it to punish him. I would not lower it because he was my father. Fairness had to work in both directions." He left without shaking my hand. A year after the reading, the family organized a meeting at a community center instead of the private club where they used to celebrate holidays. The invitation said they wanted to reconcile. I asked one question. "Is this about family, or is this about rent?" No one answered for 4 days. Then a handwritten letter arrived from Dad. There was no request for money, no complaint about the house, no threat from a lawyer. He wrote that he had spent his life measuring people by status, income, and how useful they were to him. He admitted that he had taught me to believe love had to be earned. At the end, he apologized for the words he had shouted outside the conference room. I took the letter to the old diner where Grandma had given me the brass key. The same waitress poured coffee into a thick white mug. Toast popped in the kitchen. Rain traced the window beside me. I read Dad's letter twice. Then I placed it next to the key. I did not call him that day. Maybe forgiveness would come later. Maybe it would not. But for the first time in my life, his apology did not arrive with a bill attached. The brass key still rests beside my laptop. It once stood for the houses Grandma owned, but now it reminds me of something bigger. I decide who gets access to my life. Love should never require you to pay someone's bills, provide their home, or accept humiliation just to be called family. Forgiveness is a choice. Boundaries are a right. If you have ever had to protect someone from the people who should have protected them, share your story in the comments and subscribe. Because the next story may remind you that choosing yourself is not betrayal, it is survival.